Welcome everyone. We are here with Amanda Taylor from Maes Derw, which is the Pupil Referral Unit. So we're meeting today to talk to you a bit about alternative settings, which is going to really help your year one alternative setting placement. Hi Amanda, how's your day?
Hi, busy day, but it's Friday.
Yes, indeed. So can you just provide a bit of context to where your school is? It's a new build, looking at the picture there. Can you just provide a little bit of context for our students?
Yes, certainly. So Maes Derw opened January 2021 following a 4-year project. Prior to that, we had 4 different centres across Swansea in what were old buildings that had been used by other areas. We had a social services building, we had a school, we had what was part of an old school that basically were in really poor condition, and spent several years working with Cabinet and Council to develop the new build, which we opened. And in that building then we amalgamated what were the 4 previous centres. So it currently contains a primary phase unit, which is called T Porfor. So that caters for 21 primary age pupils. It has a secondary phase with catering for pupils who have got mental health and anxiety difficulties. So young people who will really struggle, who may be self-harming, may have eating disorders, may have suicidal thoughts, and will really struggle to access mainstream provision because of the level of their anxiety. And we have 35 places there. And then we have 60 planned places for Key Stage 4 for pupils with emotional behavioural difficulties, very often pupils who have been excluded, are on the verge of permanent exclusion, have been permanently excluded from mainstream provision because of their behaviour, and a further 28 planned places for similar typed pupils who are in Key Stage 3. And then added to that, we have provision for 14 planned places, which are temporary places. So they're part-time temporary with a view of being 2 terms, part-time with us, intensive support that will enable young people at an earlier stage to be able to come and have some support in order to go back into school and hopefully not need to come into AOTUS provision. We also house our services for home tuition. So again, part of AOTUS provision is the home tuition service. So we can work with up to 80 children and young people who will be referred to the home tuition service, either because they've got a medical problem that's preventing them from going into school, or as an interim provision while they're possibly looking for something instead of mainstream but haven't found the correct provision, and that will be provided for them in the interim. Sometimes it'll be young people who have been excluded in year 11, so they will go on to home tuition in order to allow them to complete their qualifications and hopefully find places for them either in employment or further education. And we also then have a prevention early intervention team and a behaviour support team that we work with schools at that earlier stage. So we've got a strategy that provides capacity building at schools with training to support schools in developing their provision to meet the needs of young people with social and emotional difficulties, right the way through to targeted support in schools for young people with our behaviour support team. And then we've got, as I said, you go into the halfway house of the temporary part-time support right the way through to the pupil referral unit itself.
We were chatting earlier, a lot of our students, I think a lot of teachers as well, just aren't aware what a pupil referral unit is, if I can say that properly. Could you just give a bit of background to what is a pupil referral unit for our students?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I only came into the sector 5 years ago, but I've been involved in doing some training way back in the 90s, and have had some connection with the pupil referral unit in Swansea for a period of probably 25 years. And sort of thought that all pupil referrals were the same until I came into the sector, and they look very different depending on the local authority and depending on the needs of that local authority. So they will differ very much in size, from single class provision in some small local authorities, where you will have local authorities where they will have multiple sites across their local authority. Particularly if you've got large and rural areas, then they will tend to have smaller but more PRUs, and they'll differ in terms of who they cater for. So sometimes they cater for young people that have got challenging behaviour, other times for children that have got mental health and anxiety needs. But the principle really is that EOTAS are educated other than at school to cater for young people who cannot manage or cannot access the mainstream provision at that point in time. The main focus is in the reintegration of people back into mainstream school. So within that, our focus will always be to provide young people with the skills, the understanding, the ability to regulate their emotions or their behaviours to be able to access mainstream provision. And that's very much a core purpose for us.
You've touched there a little bit about your background. So were you in mainstream classrooms before? And
yeah, I trained originally in additional learning needs was my specialist area, and worked in special education. Passionate about inclusion right the way through from a very early stage of even beginning to apply for teaching, and decided I didn't want to work in specialist provision, funnily enough, in the beginning. So I was working in our specialist teaching facilities for specialist classes for young people with severe learning difficulties to multiple and profound learning difficulties, but attached to mainstream provision. I then came out and did some advisory work for the local authority within that field, and then went back into school. Missed the children too much to be out for too long, so went back into school, but went back into mainstream, where I went back in as a deputy and went on to be head of 2 primary schools before applying for this post.
We were chatting earlier as well. I think, you know, a lot of students, a lot of teachers aren't aware of this sector, and we're missing a lot of really good teachers in this setting. So why would you recommend to any of our students to come over to even just try this as a placement?
If you are passionate about making a difference to the lives of young people who are extremely challenged as well as challenging, who have had many barriers in terms of their opportunities to access mainstream education, and many of our children have had, you know, quite traumatic starts in life, and many of them are still living in very challenging circumstances. It makes them quite difficult to teach because they don't necessarily build relationships with other adults very well. They find it very difficult to trust adults, and they find it very difficult to trust systems, and they see education, they've already sort of perceived themselves to have failed within the mainstream system, so they are quite wary of actually building a relationship with education. Many of them will have attachment difficulties. We have a higher percentage of children who are looked after. We have a higher percentage of children who have additional learning needs. So they will have many barriers. And if you are passionate about making a difference to children who have that level of challenge, then it's certainly the area to work. I think you have to be passionate. You have to want to work in that area. You have to be extremely good at your job to work in this area, because you've got children who don't necessarily want to learn or have difficulties in learning, whether that be an additional learning need. So we have a high percentage of young people who've got neurodevelopmental difficulties, but also additional learning need in terms of the level of trauma that they might have experienced will make it very, very difficult for them to concentrate and focus on learning, and their readiness for learning has to be developed. So in terms of the skill, the art, the pedagogical skills that are needed in terms of engaging young people and enabling them to make the progress, we're looking for the best. But if you can make that connection, and if you can build that relationship and build the trust, you're not just supporting young people in their academic development, but you're supporting them in their whole life journey. And I think that makes it a very, very rewarding place to work.
Yeah, and students that have gone out on placement and then gone on to work in the sector have said that just how rewarding it is, and it's very different to when they've worked in a mainstream classroom. Just they see that difference. It's very different to a mainstream setting. So, you've been kind enough to offer some placements to our students, and our students are going out into different settings. With your head teacher hat on, what sort of tips would you give to our students in terms of your expectations ahead? What would you expect to see from year one students on a placement?
I think to be well prepared, and I think that goes for teaching and working with young people. The preparation needs to be put in place. You can't just wing it. You have to be professional and you have to be prepared. But in working in a sector such as a PRU, then you have to be even better prepared, because you need to have your plan A, your plan B and your plan C all lined up and ready to go. You need to be adaptable and flexible. You need to be able to sometimes change your priorities. Your priority may be on developing a certain skill, but actually that young person will come in with a very different need on that day, and your priority needs to change to reflect and to be able to support them in that need. It's the professional, it's the skill of developing a professional relationship where you can let a young person know that you are there for them and you care for them and you are going to support them, but without crossing that professional boundary, if you like. And I think that's a very important skill to develop and to continue to develop. And I've got to say, I continue to develop it every single day. So I think it is that preparedness for it. It's setting a good example. It's looking at what we wear. It's very easy to come in, but we sometimes speak to some staff about the appropriateness of the clothing that they wear. So it needs to be practical. It needs to be smart. We need to uphold that professional image, but it also needs to be something that you're comfortable in and you can move about in freely should you need to. With particularly, I mean, we've got 5-year-olds that we're on the floor with, we're out in the outdoor learning area with, right the way through to 16-year-olds who sometimes will need us to be running around with them and burning off and letting off steam with them. I know we talked earlier about phones. Phones can be a massive issue for some of our children. Some of them are quite vulnerable and could become very susceptible to sexual exploitation as part of their use of phones. Some will access information that is totally inappropriate for them to be accessing, and some of them will use their phones to hurt or to bully others. So we have a rule in terms of phones where we expect children not to use them. So then we expect staff not to be using their phones for personal use while they're on site as well. And I just think it's that role model in terms of how we look after ourselves, how we look after colleagues and peers around us, how we behave, and the sort of way that we manage our emotions, we regulate our emotions, we manage and regulate our behaviours, because we are important in co-regulating those emotions and behaviours with young people. So it's really, really important that they can see what you do to back up what you say.
Oh, definitely. That's really helpful advice. I was just picking up something you said there as well, just something that our students have been in different PRU settings. They've loved going in the outdoors. It's very different again to mainstream in that there's different opportunities within the classroom to go and explore different things. They've been to beaches, they've been to different outdoor settings. So if you do love the outdoors, that's another unique thing of the PRU.
Yeah, absolutely. We established as part of the build, we looked at the whole structure and we looked at the whole staffing restructure. And as part of that, we felt very strongly that the use of the outdoors and the ability to take children out of the classroom setting was really, really important. The difficulty, I suppose, with a PRU is because a PRU is meant to be able to support young people to go back into mainstream school. We follow the mainstream curriculum, and there needs to be a mirroring, if you like, of mainstream provision in order to allow them to do that, which is slightly different from a specialist provision where you can come away from that. So what we've needed to do is to look at the new curriculum for Wales and to look at, and it's a gift for us to look at how we can use the outdoors as part of that. So the children and young people, again, one of the things we've wanted to do is to ensure that they've got ownership and they're part of the development. So they've been developing the grounds and they've been developing the rear of our building into their own forest school area. So it looks fantastic. We have a fire pit out there. They've built dens. We've got various willow structures there. They've built paths. And it really is a lovely place. And they've sort of, in their DT work, They've built benches, they've built seating, they've built bird boxes and bird feeders. So it's now being part of the overall curriculum where they can look at sustainability, they can look at the environment, but it's also a really, really pleasant place for them to go out and work and play. So for us, it's really, really important. And we've extended that. So we've managed to get a site further down in the Gower. And again, we've developed that as a forest school that we can use and we can take young people to.
Wow.
So older children are cutting down and cutting logs. I mean, I sometimes think when I see 5-year-olds running around with a fire pit and marshmallows and sticks, you know, what could possibly go wrong? But they love it. The relationships are built very, very soundly there with the staff. They get to let off steam. They get to learn in an environment that's non-threatening. And it's just been such a huge success for us. This year we're starting to look at coastal schools and starting to develop that. I mean, again, we're gifted here, living so near to the sea, so that we can use that to support us. But certainly looking at how we can use our environment to support the development of the curriculum and to support the development of the well-being of the child is really, really important here.
Oh, I'm jealous. Coastal school sounds amazing. And we're really appreciative of your time and your experience as well. If we could finish really on any top, I guess, one top tip for obviously either mainstream or in an alternative setting. Obviously, a number of our students are going off into becoming teachers. Anything you would give as a top tip for them getting into teaching?
Keep learning and don't be afraid that you never get to the bottom of your to-do list. I think are my top tips. I never ever fail to stop learning. I learn every single day. Every single child is different. We can't expect children to conform to our expectations, and we have to learn with them so that we can adapt in the way that we relate to them, the way that we work with them, so that we can be the best that we can for them. And as I said, every child is different, and I never fail to stop learning. But equally, not to beat yourself up. The job in terms of working in education is a job where you will never ever finish learning. You will never ever get to the point where you say, I am the very best that I can possibly be and I can't be any better. You never get to the end of your to-do list, because there will always be something else that will come up. And I remember as a teacher always thinking, I'm going to do this planning, it's going to be a 2-year plan and I'll repeat it in 2 years, and I never got to repeat it. So I think it's that being kind to yourself as well. You're learning on the job, you learn on the job at the start, but you're still learning on the job at the end. And I think being reflective about that learning, constantly looking at what could I have done differently? That worked, how can I share that? How can I develop it? That didn't work. How can I do it differently next time to get a better outcome, with the constant eye on the fact that the reason you're doing it is to support young people, and those young people have one chance.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really reassuring as well. The head teacher saying to be kind to yourself as well. That's really, really important for our students going forward as well. Well, thanks so much for your time on a hectic Friday. I know that this will be really, really good advice for our students. So thanks again.
Thank you. It's lovely speaking to you.